What if I told you that a man who had never acted a single day in his life walked into a Hollywood casting office carrying his own paintings just in case they turned him down, and walked out with a role in a film that would sweep every major Academy Award? What if I told you that same man once brought an entire movie production to a halt because the studio cast white actors as Native Americans and refused to speak a single line until they fixed it? And what if I told you the phone call that launched his entire career came from a used car dealer who told a producer he'd just met the biggest, most unforgettable Native American he'd ever seen walk through his door? This is the story of Will Sampson, a 6'7" Muskogee Creek rodeo cowboy, Navy veteran, oil field worker, and self-taught painter from Okmulgee, Oklahoma, who became the first Native American to break through as a genuine Hollywood star, reshaped how an entire industry portrayed his people, and did it all while insisting acting was really just something he did to fund his painting habit. But before he was Chief Bromden, before he stood alongside Jack Nicholson and Clint Eastwood, and before he reportedly performed a real cleansing ceremony on a set people believed was cursed, Will Sampson was just a barefoot kid in rural Oklahoma, drawing pictures in the dirt. Number 1. The boy who drew in the dirt. William Sampson Jr. was born on September 27, 1933, in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, to Wiley and Mabel Lewis Sampson, both full-blood Muskogee Creek. His family called him Sonny. At birth, he was given the Muskogee name Kwas Kwasi, meaning left-handed, and that left hand would go on to shape the rest of his life. From the moment he could hold a pencil, Will drew constantly, covering every surface he could find. When paper ran out, he'd draw across his sister's school book covers, and even when those ran out, he'd draw straight into the dirt with a stick. His sister Norma later recalled that from the earliest age he could grip a pencil, that boy never stopped drawing, and when he had nothing else, the ground would do just fine. At the time, she'd crumple up his drawings and toss them out without a second thought. Years later, she admitted with a laugh that carried real regret that she never imagined a day would come when she couldn't even afford one of his paintings herself. Will likely only made it through the 9th grade, but his real education was never going to come from a classroom. It was going to come from the back of a bucking bronco, the deck of a Navy ship, and the surface of a canvas nobody had ever asked him to paint. So what do you do when you're a Creek teenager in 1940s Oklahoma with more raw talent than opportunity and a body that just won't stop growing? Number 2. 2 decades of dust and canvas. Will competed in his first rodeo at just 14, and for the next 20 years rode the circuit, specializing in saddle bronc and bull riding, chasing prize money that came in short bursts and vanished just as fast. In between seasons, he served in the U.S. Navy from 1953 to 1955, and at some point during his service learned to fly, though his sister was always careful to clarify he learned to pilot a plane during his time in the Navy, but was never technically a Navy pilot himself. That kind of precision mattered to the Sampson family. After leaving the Navy, Will drifted between jobs the way a tumbleweed drifts between fence posts, working as a roughneck, a construction worker, and a lineman, doing whatever kept him afloat while the paintings kept coming. Through every job, every 8-second ride, Will never stopped painting, capturing sweeping Western landscapes, traditional Muskogee scenes, wild horses, buffalo, and the faces of people who looked like him. Critics would later compare his style to Charles M. Russell, the celebrated painter of the American West, but filtered through the lens of a man who had actually lived the world Russell could only romanticize. Some paintings sold, and when they did, according to his sister, he'd celebrate for a while before the money inevitably ran out and he'd be right back looking for work. By his teens, he was already 6 feet tall and kept growing, eventually settling somewhere between 6'4" and 6'7", depending on who measured. He had hands like shovels, a voice like distant thunder, and a face that looked carved from Oklahoma sandstone. He was 41, had never acted, had no agent, no connections, and no real interest in Hollywood whatsoever. And then a used car dealer picked up a telephone. Number 3, the call that changed everything. In 1974, producers Saul Zench and Michael Douglas were putting together One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Ken Kesey's novel about rebellion inside a mental institution. They had Jack Nicholson for the lead and Milos Forman to direct, but they had a problem. The story's most pivotal character, Chief Bromden, was a towering Native American patient who spends years pretending to be deaf and mute. They needed a real Native American actor, and he needed to be physically massive, since the character's imposing presence was the entire point. Michael Douglas struck up a conversation with a man named Mel Lambert on an airplane, a used car dealer and rodeo announcer from Yakima, Washington. Douglas mentioned the search, and roughly 6 months later, Lambert called to tell him about the biggest, most striking Native American man he'd ever encountered on his lot. That man was Will Sampson. A slightly different version, told by Will's own sister, has him up painting in the mountains near Yakima when a friend mentioned a movie searching for a tall, rugged Native actor, and Will figured he had nothing to lose. However, the two sides connected, and what happened next became Hollywood legend. Will reportedly walked into the casting office carrying his own paintings, figuring if they didn't want him as an actor, maybe they'd at least buy a painting. They hired him for the role and bought the paintings anyway. When Will boarded the small production plane for the first time, Jack Nicholson reportedly climbed straight into his lap, repeating, "It's the chief, man." Will Sampson had never acted in his life, not in a school play, not even in front of a mirror, and now he was about to share the screen with the biggest movie star on the planet.
Number 4, the giant who said 2 words. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest hit theaters in 1975 and swept all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay, a sweep only 2 other films in history had achieved. It grossed over $108 million domestically on a $3 million budget, the second highest grossing film of that year behind only Jaws. In the middle of it all stood Will Sampson, largely silent, enormous, and watchful, his face carrying entire unspoken conversations. Chief Bromden spends most of the film pretending he can't hear or speak, and when he finally does, the moment had to land like a thunderclap. It did. The word was simply juicy fruit, offered as a stick of bum from McMurphy, and it became one of the most memorable moments in the film. Critics took notice immediately, with journalist Dick Kleiner describing his acting as purely instinctive. Throughout filming, Will had insisted Chief Bromden would not be reduced to a Hollywood cliché, no broken English, no exaggerated stereotype. In a 1976 New York Times interview, he explained he refused to let his character become one more entry in Hollywood's long habit of treating Native people as scenery rather than human beings, a quietly cutting line that was impossible to argue with. Number 5, iron in your words. Once Cuckoo's Nest hit theaters, Hollywood came calling fast, and Will answered, strictly on his own terms. In 1976, Robert Altman cast him in Buffalo Bill and the Indians alongside Paul Newman and Burt Lancaster. That same year, Clint Eastwood cast him as Ten Bears, a Comanche chief in the outlaw Josie Wales, giving him a scene that would go down in Western film history, a tense campfire negotiation deciding whether 2 sides go to war or find peace. It's all dialogue, all tension, and Will Sampson commanded every second, delivering the line that there's iron in Wales's words, building through mutual respect between 2 men who'd each lost nearly everything, and landing on 4 words carrying the weight of an entire continent's history: it shall be life. Eastwood, notorious for cutting anything that slowed his films down, left the scene completely intact because he knew exactly what he had. In 1977 came The White Buffalo alongside Charles Bronson, where Will played Crazy Horse, and that set marked the moment he stopped being just an actor and became something far more disruptive to business as usual. Number 6, the day he shut down a movie. When Will arrived on the set of The White Buffalo, he found a film about the American frontier featuring multiple native characters, mostly played by white actors. He shut the whole thing down, refusing to say a line or step in front of the camera, and production came to a complete halt because one actor said no. His demand was simple: hire real native performers for native roles. The studio initially resisted, but Will didn't budge, and eventually the production caved. Marlon Brando had famously sent Sachin Littlefeather to decline his Oscar back in 1973, but Brando made that statement from a position of enormous security. Will Sampson put his own still young career on the line with almost no leverage beyond his physical presence and his convictions. That experience changed him, convincing him that individual protests on individual sets would never be enough, and that real change required actual infrastructure. Number 7. Building the door he was never given. In 1983, Will and his assistant, Zoe Escobar, secured a $30,000 grant and founded the American Indian Registry for the Performing Arts, a directory of native talent so studios would have no excuse to default to casting white actors. The registry's director, Bob Hicks, later shared a story proving how far Will's vision reached even after his death. A production company came looking for native actors for an upcoming Western, and Hicks handed them the registry. That company was Kevin Costner's Tig Productions, and the script was Dances with Wolves, a film that cast native actors in every native role and won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Its casting pipeline ran directly through the organization a rodeo painter from Okmulgee had built. All the while, Will's acting career never slowed, earning a Canadian Genie nomination for Fish Hawk in 1979 and continuing to choose roles that let native characters exist as real people rather than props. But it was his final major role in 1986 that added perhaps the strangest chapter yet.
Number 8. The Medicine Man on a Haunted Set. Poltergeist 2: The Other Side hit theaters in 1986, with Will playing Taylor, a native shaman helping a family fight supernatural forces. The film grossed nearly $75 million on a $19 million budget, but the production carried an unsettling reputation since multiple cast members from the original Poltergeist had died in the years since, and the so-called curse had become Hollywood folklore. Will wasn't just playing a shaman on screen, he genuinely was one, and according to multiple accounts from cast and crew, he sensed something wasn't right and performed a cleansing ceremony on the soundstage. Co-star Craig T. Nelson later said the strange occurrences stopped after that. Years later, visiting Will's grave during cicada season, Nelson said the deafening buzz of insects gradually faded to complete silence as he spoke. An anecdote that's unverifiable, but captures something essential about a man who occupied a space between the rational and the spiritual. That same year, he appeared in Firewalker alongside Chuck Norris, his final feature film, because by 1987, the body that carried him through rodeos, oil fields, and Hollywood had begun to fail. Number 9. First, last, and always a painter. Remember the boy who drew in the dirt with no paper? Remember the 41-year-old who brought his paintings to a casting call just in case? That boy and that man never changed. Will described himself as first, last, and always a painter, and his sister confirmed it without hesitation. Where Hollywood saw a movie star, he saw a painter who happened to act between canvases. His work captured Western landscapes, Muskogee ceremonial scenes, wild horses, and buffalo hunts, and one large painting, Ribbon Dance, still hangs at the Creek Council House Museum in Okmulgee today. His work was exhibited at institutions including the Gilcrease Museum and the Philbrook Museum of Art, and a posthumous book collected more than 50 of his paintings and over 70 sketches, an output that would be remarkable even for a full-time studio painter, let alone a man simultaneously riding rodeos and shooting films. He once joked that acting simply funded his painting habit, And like most of his jokes, it was funny because it was also completely true. Number 10. The giant who refused to disappear. In early 1987, Will was diagnosed with scleroderma, a chronic autoimmune disease that hardens the skin and attacks internal organs, and in his case, targeted his heart and lungs without mercy. The man who once weighed 260 pounds wasted away to just 140. On April 23, 1987, Will underwent a heart-lung transplant in Houston. The transplanted organs functioned properly, but his body, ravaged by months of illness, couldn't hold on, and a dormant fungal infection reactivated once his immune system was suppressed to prevent rejection. On June 3, 1987, 41 days after the transplant, Will Sampson died of post-operative kidney failure. He was 53. He was brought back to Okmulgee for a private Muskogee ceremony and buried within the boundaries of the Muskogee Creek Nation, the same land where he was born and first drew pictures in the dirt. Jack Nicholson mourned him publicly, saying he would miss a great friend. But the story didn't end there. His son Tim later reprised the role of Chief Bromden in a 2001 Broadway production, and his sons Sam and Miko became known as the Sampson brothers, performing traditional Muskogee dances across the country and keeping their father's culture alive. Today, a road in Okmulgee County bears his name, and on October 14, 2023, 36 years after his death, Will Sampson was formally inducted into the National Native American Hall of Fame. The barefoot kid who drew in the dirt, the rodeo rider who painted between competitions, the man who brought his own paintings to his own audition, who shut down a movie production over principle, who helped build the pipeline that cast Dances with Wolves, who performed a cleansing ceremony on a haunted soundstage, and who always insisted he was first, last, and always a painter, was all of those things and something more. Above everything else, he became something Hollywood had never before allowed a Native American to be. He became the star.